Hello everyone, I trust you're fine, and this is where we left from last video. So if you are new, we just had a function called greet, which its work was to print hello Mary, how are you? Then you are calling the function. So if you don't know about how to create a function or how to call a function, you should visit last video. So just to add, a function can have parameters and a return statement. So parameters is the things that you pass here. For example, you can make this function even more robust by adding parameters, let's say name. Then here, instead of saying hello Mary, you can just say hello, then you print the name. And you can use the f strings to do that. The f strings that you learned, just put f, then inside here you write your variable name. In this case, my variable is called name. When you use the parameters, when you're calling the function, you have to include an argument. So an argument is something which you pass to the function. So in this case, I can just say Mary. So if I run this code, it will say, hello, Mary, how are you? So if I run this code, it will say, hello, Mary, how are you? So that was just a simple introduction about parameters, but we'll learn parameters in future videos. In this video, we're supposed to learn the return statements. So without much ado, let's dive in. A return statement is used to exit a function and return a value to the caller. So allow me to delete this so that you can write some new functions here. So for example, we have a function that, let's say, doubles a number. So to create that function, I can just say something like def, then the name of the function, I can call it double. So the work of this function is just take a number and double it. So this function, that's the syntax. Then I can pass a parameter here, let's say something like num. You can just give it any name. This, like, it acts like a variable, but I've told you that we learn about parameters in the next video, so don't worry about these parameters. So in this function, in the body, I can say what this function does. It just takes a number, that number that you pass there, then it doubles. Doubles just times by 2. Then here, for this to be returned, I'll just say returned. I'll use the return keyword. So this is what we call the return statement. It's used to exit a function and return a value to the caller. So if I call this function, if I say double, then I call it to the value 5, like that. So this 5 will be passed to this double here. So in this num is just a placeholder. It's called a parameter. And this 5 is the actual value. It's called the argument. So the actual value is called the argument. The placeholder is called the parameter. So if I call this double with the value 5, this num will represent the 5. So I'll return 5 times 2, that is 10. So the return statement is used to return a value. So if I call this function double and call it the value 5, I'll get the value 10. So you can just run this. First, for me to see it in the console, I have to print this. So I'll just print this function call. So I'll say this print so that I can see it in the terminal. And if I run this code, the value 10 will be displayed in the terminal. So you can see it will just say 10. I got 10 because it was 5 times 2. If I change the value of 5, maybe I put something like 4, it will return 8 because it will be 4 times 2. So depending on what value you call here, that value times 2 is what will be returned. Because what the function does, it just takes a number and doubles it. As we said earlier, a function performs a specific task. This function, its task is to double a number. So it takes a number and doubles it. So this is the syntax of the return statement. Just write the return keyword, then you put an expression. So the value of this expression is what will be returned. So if you call this function, this 10 is what will be returned. To make it even simpler, I can just store this in a variable. I can just say maybe dub, then I give it that expression. Then I can say return dub, dub, like that. So this expression will be run, that value will be stored in the variable dub, then this function will return dub. And if I run this code, I'll still get the value 8. You can see 8 is printed in the terminal because that's what this function did. What we did was we returned a single value. Also, the return statement can return none. That is, if a function does not explicitly return a value, it returns null. Like the function that we had previously. we are just printing to the console. We didn't return anything. So it will return null by default. For example, instead of returning dub, if we did something like print dub, you can see it didn't return anything, just printed. And if you call this function, it will just print dub to the terminal. It did not return anything, it's just printing. By default, this function will return none because we didn't have a return statement. And this is not useful because we cannot use this value of 4. The return statement is useful because whenever we need that value, we can use it somewhere else. But with this function, if we put the print statement, we cannot use this value 4 because we don't get the actual value. The value is just printed to the terminal, which is not useful to us. If you want to do more complex, like math, you will not have access to that value. So that's the importance of having the return statement. So I'll just return the code there it was with this return statement. Also, you can have multiple returns. As you can see here, you can have multiple returns. Let me just copy this function and paste it, then I'll just explain what it does. So here, I have a function called arithmetic operations, which takes two parameters a and b, and it returns multiple values. The first value that it returns is the sum of those two numbers, the sum of a and b. The second return statement is the difference of those two numbers. The third is the product of those two numbers, and the fourth is the division of those two numbers. So if you have multiple returns, you can separate them using a comma. You can see this, they're separated using commas. So each return, each value is separated by a comma. So here I have 4 values and I'm returning them separated by a comma. And when I call this function, I get 4 values. So if I just call, let me just make this even simpler. I can just call the function, it's called arithmetic operations. I just missed the spelling like that. So if I call this function with the value 10 and 2, I'll get 4 values. So let me just print this so that you can see them in the terminal. If I run this code, I'll get the value 12, 8, 20, and you can say I get the value 12, 8, 20, and 5. This 12 is the first value where I get the sum of 10 and 2, which is 12. This 8 is the second value where I get the difference between 10 and 2, which is 8. 20 is the product, and 5 is the division. So that is multiple values, but this is mostly not used. The one for single value is the most common used return statement. So that is it. That was it for the return statement. See you in the next video. We'll learn about the parameters. So see you there. Peace out.